people are just waiting for a call by the media, but it may not come until later today. It may not come until tomorrow. It may not come, may come in the next 15 minutes. It seems difficult to sort of sense at this point, but clearly what has happened, and I think the dynamic that we saw in Georgia, and to a certain extent we see this in Nevada, we see it in Pennsylvania, but it doesn't seem to be drawing as much tension, maybe because of the votes that are coming in from Philadelphia. But the bottom line is that we all knew there was going to be a red mirage of sorts. And there was a sense that mail-in ballots would tend to favor Joe Biden and the Democrats because more Democrats were encouraged to mail in their ballots. And Donald Trump spent an inordinate amount of time saying that mail-in ballots were fraudulent or they wouldn't get your ballots counted. I mean, he was setting it up and hoping that would be the case. And it's quite possible that when Donald Trump essentially telegraphed to everyone that their strategy was to delegitimize mail-in ballots and to set up situations where they would not be counted after a certain number of days or there'd be discrepancies, he essentially warned Democrats as to what his strategy would be. And Democrats made sure to make sure that ballots got in there quickly and then started to encourage people, drop off your absentee ballots, drop off your mail-in ballots, do it much quicker than you had anticipated needing doing it. And certainly the dynamic in Nevada and Georgia was people anticipated red districts that favored Donald Trump overwhelmingly in the day of election. They presumed that mail-in ballots would be reflective of that in those districts. But and maybe that's at first blush a safe assumption, but then you realize that, wait a second, it could be just that the people who are sending in mail-in ballots tend to be the Democrats. And so what happened in many instances is that Donald Trump did not nearly garner enough net positive votes from those mail-in ballots that one would have assumed if the mail-in ballots reflected the dynamic of election day. And in fact, in some red districts, you had Joe Biden picking up votes, not a huge amount, but some from those mail-in ballots being counted because Democrats were mailing in their ballots and Republicans weren't. And so that explains it. Now, this has all been very difficult, apparently, for the president to digest, to understand. I'm never really clear if he really believes what he says in these type of press conferences, or if he's just surrounded by people who are telling him this, or if it's a strategy. But here's Donald Trump sitting in the White House, and he's a little bit low energy, folks. Wonder why, saying that you need to count he's coming up with a new term for votes, legal votes as opposed to illegal votes.
Update on our efforts to protect the integrity of our very important 2020 election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio. To name just a few, we won these and many other victories despite historic election interference from big media, big money, and big tech. As everybody saw, we won by historic numbers. And the pollsters got it knowingly wrong. They got it knowingly wrong. We had polls that were so ridiculous, and everybody knew it at the time. There was no blue wave that they predicted. They thought there was going to be a big blue wave that was false. It was done for suppression reasons, but instead there was a big red wave, and it's been properly acknowledged actually by the media. They were, I think, very impressed, but that was after the fact. That doesn't do us any good. We kept the Senate despite having twice as many seats to defend as Democrats, and in a really much more competitive states, we did a fantastic job with this.
There was no blue wave. There was also no red wave. We had a record number of people voting, frankly, in this election. And certainly Democrats were far more confident that the stench at the top of the ticket in terms of Donald Trump would stink and stick to the Republicans down ballot. And it did not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with Ben Dixon as well. But I think that's clearly a failure of the Democrats to tie Republicans to Donald Trump. I mean, it's a very difficult message to say, here's John Kasich speaking at our convention, a man who has no responsibility for Donald Trump just simply because that's where it landed for him, as opposed to the idea like this is a guy who is an important part of the Republican Party, and Republicans developed all of the politics in which Donald Trump won on. But we will get to that. Here is Donald Trump also saying that there's something amiss in Georgia, and apparently forgetting one important point about it. Let's play this clip.
Suppression. There are now only a few states yet to be decided in the presidential race. The voting apparatus of those states are run in all cases by Democrats. We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away in secret, and they wouldn't allow legally permissible observers. We went to court in a couple of instances, and we were able to get the observers put in. And when the observers got there, they wanted them 60, 70 feet away, 80 feet, 100 feet away, or outside the building to observe people inside the building. And we won a case, a big case, and we have others happening. There are lots of litigation, even beyond our litigation. There's tremendous amount of litigation generally because of how unfair this process was. And I predict.
Yeah. Well, 2 points we should say that the entire narrative about observers not being in there turns out to be a total fabrication. That observers were in every location, multiple observers. In some instances, they had to stay 6 to 10 feet away from the vote counters. Can anybody guess why that might be the case during a pandemic?
The Biden crime family.
That's
Communist China, yeah.
But the idea that there was no observers there, we have many people who are inside saying that's a total lie. And the idea that let's say, for instance, the state of Georgia, where it's really just a race between Georgia and Pennsylvania to see where Donald Trump will first lose the election, I guess, right? It will first be most out of his hands. He should go back, check out his tweets from almost exactly 2 years ago, November 26, 2018. Real Donald Trump. Brad Raffensperger will be a fantastic Secretary of State for Georgia. Will work closely with Brian Kemp, Georgia. That is he is speaking of the now Republican Secretary of State for Georgia. In other words, a Republican who runs the election system there in Georgia. So Donald Trump in the throes, trying to accept the situation. Anybody can bring lawsuits, ladies and gentlemen. That's not indicative of anything. And those lawsuits are winding their way through the courts, and there does not appear to be any type of legitimate remedy for what they're talking about. The idea that you would go back and somehow figure out which votes were not observed and throw them out is absurd. But again, this is really just more of an aggrievement play at this point. There doesn't seem to have been any cohesive strategy to undercut, as much as it appeared that they were forming one, or they did have a strategy and it just didn't work out that well. Can't tell everybody that we're going to challenge all these votes unless you get them in on time. And you can't tell them that if that's what your strategy is. You can't tell them in time so that these people get the votes in time. And that seems what happened. There does not seem to be any like straggler votes, except for ones that were stuck at the post office, despite the fact that the post office was under a federal court order to sweep all local post offices for any ballots and process them quickly. And about 180,000 turned up after the fact. They may be now largely irrelevant, but that could have been extremely messy. And I hope on day one, the Democrats have Louis DeJoy in there. I don't care what his position is at that point, and run through this whole thing. Some genuine accountability.